Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm Dev.
And I'm Hugh, and this episode is focusing on minute 63 of the film. And in this case, we have Grocer and Blank still at breakfast in the diner at Grosse Pointe, except that everything is about to explode. The tension is rising fast.
And joining us all of this week, we have Dr. Rayna Denison. Welcome back, Rayna. Those of you who've been listening through this podcast will have noticed that we've gone a little bit more movie heavy, a little bit more in depth. Why is that, Rayna?
Well, hi everyone. Yeah, that would be because Hugh, as Hugh knows well, we've been chatting for years and years. But I'm a professor of film and digital arts at the University of Bristol, so I'm a giant film nerd and very happy to talk forever about the ways the aesthetics of this film kind of, I think, take us on an intertextual relay, almost like a loop back to the very earliest parts of film history, right through to the contemporary films that were being made in this moment in 1997. So it's a joy to be able to kind of explore that in some depth. I love that we're doing this minute by minute because it allows us to really go into detail about those movements back and forth that you get in this movie through film history. So yay.
I do think that the movies by minute community needs to reach out to more academics. I feel like it's the perfect marriage that hasn't completely happened yet.
It's fantastic having that encyclopedia of knowledge to actually be able to draw on and to see the influences and you know, they may not be conscious influences on the decision making of the film, but they're there nonetheless, and being able to pull those out is, I think, hugely beneficial for getting that deeper understanding of the film. So
and to be fair, that is mostly Hugh.
No, it's not. The irony here is I'm self-taught, right? When I went to university, media studies was in its infancy. It was still cultural studies, and I was at the University of Sussex. They had an entire section of the library devoted to cultural studies and film. And I spent my law degree in there reading the film books instead, and going to the Duke of York Cinema in Brighton for its late night double bills on the weekend.
Yeah.
And so in that, and I didn't get into the media until a good 10, 12 years later, after which you and I met when we were lecturing at, it was King's College, it was London, wasn't it? It was UCL.
No, yeah, we met at UCL, yeah, but I was then a lecturer down in Sussex.
Oh, yes, you were.
Yeah.
Yes, but yes,
they have a film and media department down there that I got into as
and then you went to Norwich after that.
Yeah. And then after that to Bristol, where I am now.
Yes, because we were talking about
anime.
Yeah,
we were.
Yeah, because I remember thinking, because I remember we sat down next to each other and somebody was talking about Haruhi, Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, and you literally started doing the dance from the credits, sitting there. Right? All the rest of the audience
as we were talking,
and this guy's talking, and you just like, and I was like, raving fangirl, perfect.
It is true.
My people.
It is true. I mean, it was a joyous event. Yeah.
It was fun. It was a very small seminar, but packed.
I think that event was wonderful because it did everything from Peppa Pig through to anime.
It did. It was a proper kind of, this Dev is exactly why when you get us together, it is going to go all over the place in terms of film history, TV history, because we've worked in these fields for so long where our job has been to make the connections. Our job has been to draw the parallels. And quite often, as you say, Dev, the filmmakers themselves don't. And yeah, I mean, I do feel like sometimes those of us who do podcasts, those of us who write criticism, those of us who do this for I don't know if we're living anymore, but still, I feel like those of us who've done this for years, often there is the old debate. I mean, this is a joke. I teach English and history now for secondary school, and it is a joke with English teachers. You know, the author said, this is blue, and the English teacher says, yeah, they said it's blue because, and then we go on for like 2 hours. And the fact is, both can coexist at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. The joy is in actually having that fun to go out there and expand on the idea of, is it blue because? Does it mean because? Does it allow us to have that's the fun of it. And anyone who says to us, and I know you've been told this, Rayna, because you and I will have been told this so many times over the years by all sorts of people, including friends, doesn't it spoil? watching
Oh
films
no,
for you. No, no,
no,
it
no.
doesn't. This is the joy of it, right?
And I agree with that. And as someone who did English literature before, like at A level, before I went and did film as a PhD and MA student, I've got to say the big difference is the fact that films have such a kind of a rich tapestry of stuff going on so densely that it's almost never the case that you can analyze a whole film and feel like
Yeah.
you know it inside and out, which is why again I love that you guys are doing this minute by minute, because you can do it minute by minute and still have more that you wish you talked about later.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I would not have volunteered for any other movie by minute podcast immediately, given that I thought I was surprised by the idea of the format. I felt like it was too much. Could you really do it? And Dev's passion for the film, Dev's absolute love of the film, and the fact he offered to be the producer instead of me meant I was like, yeah, I'm on board. But it did take me, what, 3 months, Dev,
Yeah,
to be convinced? Yeah.
yeah. It took a little persuasion,
Yeah.
but we got there. We got you on board.
Well, the thing is, the film is so packed. Rayna's right. This
Mm-hmm.
film is so densely packed.
Yeah,
We haven't. You and I have yet to do a minute so far, and we're over an hour into the film, and we've yet to do a minute where we've done less than 15 minutes on it.
yeah. And I mean, even with some of those, some of the time, the reason those have been shorter episodes is because we're time constrained in the real world
Mm,
for
mm.
one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually could have carried on talking, but we're conscious about it, and we've kind of had to move on. But also to your point, Raina, like, I mean, I've never considered myself somebody that's particularly good with that kind of analysis. I hated English in school. I didn't
I
enjoy it.
loved it. It just I feel like film gives you the script, it gives you the dialogue, but then it also gives you the visuals, the lighting, the use of sound,
Yeah,
the way just with an angle
yeah,
you can tell a story.
yeah,
There's
absolutely.
so much in films.
Absolutely. And we've got Hugh and I have
I
gone
mean, Dev,
through
I
this
think you do
movie.
yourself a service there. Sorry,
Hugh
go on.
Hugh and I have gone through this movie, we're more than halfway through at this point, minute by minute, and we still both love this film. And undoubtedly it has
Yeah.
changed the way in which I love the film.
Mhm.
I've isolated parts that I don't care so much for, and I've isolated parts that I appreciate in a whole new light, and all of that is to the benefit of my overall enjoyment of the film.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the other thing I like about what we're doing here, and I've said it before, and I'm happy to keep saying it because hopefully this is putting it out into the real world, and something might come of it. This is a film that has been criminally underserved by the industry.
Oh, I agree.
You
Like
know,
even right now, it's so hard to watch this movie.
yep. If you don't have
Like
Disney Plus, you haven't got it.
yeah,
You know, you
yeah.
either have to have the DVD, the Blu-ray, which is from the old DVD master and looks terrible still, or you have to
Mhm.
have Disney Plus. And of course, as you mentioned when we first started this week, Rayna, the fact that this film is technically an indie production, but obviously goes out under
Mhm.
the Touchstone slate. So there's Disney
Yeah.
money involved at the time
Yeah.
period. It's Disney sticking their toe in the water of the huge burgeoning American
Mhm.
indie crime scene and trying to get a piece of that. It's also
And
Cusack's chance to produce,
with
and so with
with
God,
Disney pulling content off platform, I'm actually not sure this is even available on Disney Plus at this point in time.
precisely.
I actually had a look for it this morning on Disney Plus in the UK and couldn't find it. But of
Oh
course,
God,
that doesn't mean it's not available on Disney Plus in the US or somewhere else.
yeah,
It
but it
it
was
just
here at
it's
Christmas
hard.
time.
Like I did have a look and didn't find it, but I mean that just could be a technical thing this morning. Who
But
knows?
but
Yeah.
it does speak to the problem of content in
Hmm.
this era, and I really, that was the other thing that, this is what part of what made me go yes to this podcast. I felt like we had to do it now. Now's the time. If we don't do it now,
Yeah.
there may be a chance that people listening to us will not be able to see the film to go with it.
Yeah, and also it's such a perfect movie, and as we've said in previous episodes, it hits in such a perfect moment. It's such an interesting moment in the late '90s where there's so much changing in Hollywood. You get the incursion of the digital into filmmaking, but you also get this kind of real shifting landscape between the indie sector, the independent sector, and the kind of stronger conglomeration. In the late 1990s, Disney was in real trouble.
Yeah,
It's
good
it's
point.
interest or it's at least in a big moment of shifting and changing in its own right,
Yeah.
becoming much more of a big major conglomerate that it is now. It's not like the 90s is a big shifting moment in film of all kinds. And so to focus on a film from that period that is itself so unusual is great. I'm so happy to be here.
See, I'm really hoping that somebody somewhere decides to do a special edition of this, and they'll come and see
Oh,
us for a
please,
commentary,
yes.
and then we can all be on it. You can do
I
the
would love
video
that.
essay and all the rest of it, and
I
because
would love that.
I have mentioned this.
My video essay would just be of the brick wall behind the two in this part of this movie. Just the shifting tonalities of the bricks. Yeah, I could do a whole video
Oh,
essay
that'd
just
be
on that.
great. I have mentioned this to somebody at Arrow, by the way, just so you know.
Oh, great.
I
Okay.
don't know. It doesn't mean it'll
Awesome.
happen. But I keep putting it out there because, there are so many little boutique labels out there finding films and being able to get a temporary license for like 6 months to a year to do an edition. And I keep hoping, but of course they can't afford to do huge extras with big names, and so I keep hoping we might be the ones, but we shall see. So coming back to this minute, we left off with Grosse and Blank realizing that their generational differences are perhaps too much to put aside. So Dev, do you want to pick us up from there?
So this is the point at which the waitress then shows up with food service, and Martin uses that as his distraction to make his exit, because obviously in the environment they're in, it's actually fairly difficult to get out of there otherwise. So dropping the plate and creating the distraction just gives him that moment to break away. And not without a little bit of taunting of Grosse first, and then we cut to Martin in his hotel room, desperately calling Marcella to try and get get in contact with his psychiatrist, Dr. Oatman.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oatman, bringing back Oatman. But I do think it's interesting that Grosse, knowing that he can't bring Martin, it's the opposite of if you can't beat him, join him. In this case, it's if you can't join him, beat him. He says, we're not going to let you do the job here.
Yeah.
And you'd think that would be enough as a threat. And then he goes full on, gross out, nasty, like proper, like horror movie Reanimator style nasty. And I don't know if we can say it and get this on YouTube, so I won't say the line. But it does lead to the oddest riposte from Cusack.
It's also interesting to me because we mentioned, yesterday and on Monday as well, I think, how much of this scene feels unscripted, and in fact, as far as we know, is unscripted based on the version of the script we have, and it's kind of a lot of improv, and it plays to Dan Aykroyd's strengths. But that actual interaction is scripted.
Yes, that one's on the page.
It's almost verbatim as it's written on the page in the version we have. And it kind of shows when, you start looking at this in the excruciating detail we're looking at it, that it does feel like a tonal shift, and it doesn't sit quite as naturally with every other part of the dialogue.
Yeah.
Although Aykroyd makes his bit work.
He does.
That facial expression he's had as his frustration and disappointment in Blank grows, justifies, or to some degree he plays it that it justifies his severity
and his inconsistency in previous scenes, and the way that he has all of those tics. Like him kind of bipolar switching like that actually does seem perfectly reasonable.
But it's Blank that doesn't.
Yeah. Also, as usual, I have this film on loop whilst we're recording.
Here we go.
And I just noticed that the brown bag that Grosse is using actually has a hole like in the bottom of it for the gun, and I'm just like, that feels a little unnecessary to have a pre-carved hole that you can fire the bullet through in a paper bag.
Well, but you know what? It heightens the threat in another level, because it suggests he's fired the gun from within that bag already.
Oh God, that's scary.
So there is something in there that just, it heightens the level of threat there in a way that I think
Oh
is
God, yes.
immediate, you know.
Yeah. That's terrifying. Like, I just
it's
shot
very
somebody
subtle.
recently.
It's almost subliminally subtle. It's
Yes.
because you only see that hole for a couple of like half seconds here and there in these scene in this across this scene.
Yeah.
But it is there, and it is kind of, why would it be there? You know?
Yeah, and also he doesn't look like once again when they threaten each other. There's a point in this at the start of this minute where they effectively point their guns at each other, having just had them at rest, if you like, under the table, and that's where we get the first, for a couple of minutes now, the first sort of, it's not a wide shot, but it's certainly a mid shot of them both in frame and these under the table. And ironically, it's so obvious that they're holding
Lovely,
guns.
yeah.
You're amazed that nobody else in the cafe in the diner has seen this. But at the same time, Cusack's face is so comically strained at this
Yes.
point, right? Like he looks like he's constipated, whereas Aykroyd looks like he really genuinely is about to kill him. You know, like he looks serious, and like in a way that you're not used to Aykroyd being in film. And I find that again,
Totally.
yeah. I again, no idea when that happened, in which take, but once again, it's the magic of this film that they've got all these different takes that somehow come together.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what it is that makes Dan Aykroyd seems so much more serious as this scene goes along. If you watch it, they start and they're both sitting fairly naturally and upright at the table. But as the scene goes on, they start to curve inwards. And so they're framed lower and lower in relation to the camera, which means they start to look up at you. And that looking down upwards at you starts to make them look more and more threatening.
Yeah.
But it's mostly Aykroyd that's doing that, rather than Cusack.
Yeah.
And that means he's all eyebrows and grimace in this. and I think that's part of it. It's part of what makes him so scary in this. He's just his positioning towards the camera is really quite stark and threatening in that moment. And you know, we're going at this at a level of detail that is maybe not naturalistic. Like, you wouldn't spend this amount of time staring at his eyebrows if you weren't looking at it minute by minute. But I do think it's there. It's there.
I think
adds
it's
to
there.
the threat.
I think looking, because I've got the frame paused here, and I actually, that you've just described, and I actually think it's beyond the eyebrows. It's also the fact, like, we know how tall Cusack is as an actor, and we've seen in this film, and yet at this point he's hunched over so tightly, his head is lower in the frame than Aykroyd, so he's diminished himself, right? He's got that extreme thing. He's got the baseball cap that makes him look like a child. The coat is too big, right? And his haircut, he's got all this. It's like he had a mullet and someone trimmed it. Whereas Aykroyd's got the buzz cut, the military style. It literally looks like a dad and his son at breakfast. It actually looks like a Midwest dad and his son. And you suddenly, and that's the point. That's literally the point it's meant to be. The only problem is, of course, they're pointing guns at each other.
Yeah, and the guns are also getting lower as the scene goes on. They start on the table with both of them having on the table. Then they have a little bit of a contretemps and they go under the table, so they're more actively moving around.
Yeah.
So again, that activity in the guns, I think, heightens the tension.
Penis substitute. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, so that shifting really is important.
Yeah.
And then he drops the food, does Cusack.
Yeah.
And when he does that, when Martin Blank drops the food, it creates a tonal shift in the whole scene.
Yeah.
Which has gone from being about reducing size and creating tensions of various kind of shifting, almost kind of marginal sorts of movement to a much bigger kind of open movement. And that, again, it creates a kind of a release in the tension.
Yep.
And then you get that really horrible, weird moment where John Cusack as Martin Blank makes kind of grunting gorilla sounds. And I would love to know what you think is going on there.
All right. I've got an idea on that.
I was not sure about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I definitely have an idea on that, but I just want to come back to the waitress for one moment, because
she's again wonderful.
and it's her intrusion that precipitates the tonal shift you're talking about. because it's not just that she brings the food. She arrives just as Grocer says the incredibly gross
Yeah.
thing that he does. You see her respond visually to it.
Hmm.
She's doing her job. She tries to then deliver the food. She puts down Grocer's
Hmm.
first, and she turns to Martin and goes, "Here's your no omelet."
You're not
Which
an omelet,
yeah,
yeah.
it's such a great way of describing it, and that's when, as you say, he flips it. She's given him. It's almost like she's given him the permission to destroy it because she's gone. Well, it's a nothing omelet.
Yeah,
No omelet. And
yeah.
he goes, right, fine, pff, I'm off. And that then allows her to become like a. He uses her basically as a body shield, right? I
He
mean,
does, yeah.
which is a horrible thing to do. She just served you breakfast, dude. But like, no, she's in the way between him and Grocer, and he's betting on the idea that Grocer won't shoot her. And I'm not sure we can trust that. I'm
No.
not sure Grocer wouldn't just, if he
Not
had to, shoot everyone in that room.
not given what we've just heard him say as well. Like,
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
extremity of the violence in his language and
Yeah.
the way he talks about people having little or no value
Yes.
is really, you know, in a movie that is quite as light-hearted and funny as Grosse Pointe Blank often is. That moment is quite shocking, I
It's
think,
chilling.
and intentionally shot. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's actually kind of helps because we've now been. It's been quite a while now since the Ultimate. It's been quite a while now since we've
Mm,
understood the world that we saw at the beginning of the film, and it's actually kind of it's a good choice, I think, in the editing suite to do this so that we are reminded of the stakes
mhm,
before this descends too far into
yeah.
buddy comedy, and also before we return to the romantic comedy part
Mhm,
of the film. We need that upping of the tension just one more time, because otherwise, because the scene can't have the resolution that it would have had otherwise, which is a
yeah.
gunfight or a physical fight. Again, the American action
Mhm.
movie has the trope of the fight in the cafe, right? There's one in the first
Yes.
season of Reacher where he walks into the
Mhm,
diner and it's supposed to be a dialogue and it turns into a fight because that's what these things do. And
mhm,
they deliberately avoid that because it's too soon for a confrontation between him and Grocer that is physical. That has to be kept in the back pocket of the plot for the final fight because ultimately we need to remember that that's really who his greatest obstacle is. It's not
yeah.
anyone else. It's not the government because
Mm,
those guys, he can take him in his sleep. If his biggest problem is actually the guy who trained him or his father figure or whatever you want to call Grocer, the previous generation. That's the big problem. It's America itself as it
yeah.
was versus the American that Martin is now and wants to be. I think.
So with that in mind, what do you think is going on with Martin Blank's little animalistic taunt as
Oh,
he
I
walks
I
out
am
of the diner?
I'm convinced he's treating the short haired sh- square-shouldered, brutish man as a gorilla. I am convinced that he's treating him as having descended to the level of saying the filthy thing that he said,
Mm,
the sexualized, gross necrophiliac joke
ugh,
he's made. I
yeah.
think he's just like, fine, you're just you're beneath me now. I'm done with you. You are
Mm,
just because in a similar manner, there's the whole way they play off each other when they first confront each other in Los Angeles, where again Grosser makes quick fire, alliterative, weird, jokey comments, and he also kind of suggests there's something he does in that first conversation. He makes some weird noises at Martin then as well.
Um, it's interesting that escape, that exit happens at all, given that
yeah.
the script cuts right at Nice Talk Sugar Mouth.
Yep.
Oh, does it? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
and
Okay.
Mm.
I I understand why they did it because I think the cut from them at the table to him in the hotel room, especially when it's them at the table pointing guns at each other to him in the
Mhm.
hotel room, is going to be jarring for an audience.
Yeah,
Hmm.
But I
yeah,
almost
agree.
wish it had ended that way.
Mm,
Really?
I kind of do because I feel like Blank's exit is done as elegantly as I think you can construct it given the situation you've created, but I don't think it reflects well on Blank.
No, and that's what I felt about those animalistic noises he makes.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
also the
using the
beat and a
waitress as
half
the
too
shield
long.
and the
Yeah.
excuse, and then
Yeah.
the gorilla
Yeah.
grunts, and all of that just leaves you with a slightly unpleasant taste in your mouth about Blank. That
But
I think so. Yeah.
but we need that. We have to be reminded of that. We've gotten too comfortable with him in the last 10 minutes.
I mean, do we though? I think for the tone of the movie, we don't.
I don't know.
This is the
He,
guy that ran back into the Quickie Mart, the Ultimart, to
To
save
save
the
yeah,
the
store clerk.
yeah.
yeah, but he's also the guy who walked into the room of someone who he was trying to kill and looked him in the face and said, "Sorry, it's not me." Bang.
Sure, I
You
mean,
know, this is the thing about him and Grocer. Grocer brings out the worst side of Martin. That's the kind of world he's come from. That's the world Martin's been making money in, and he's been slowly, as Marcellus keeps pointing out, he's been slowly losing interest in it. He doesn't want to be Grocer. You give him a few
Yeah.
years, and he will be Grocer.
He may already be worse in some way.
Precisely. And I think the whole point of coming back to I I understand also what you guys are saying about him as a character, but I also think the film is unafraid to let Martin be unsympathetic at various points. And I think that's really important to why the film is a good film and better than a number of other attempts at this kind of genre, is that they're not afraid to have you recognize what kind of man this was, for all the wisecracking about, oh, I had to ask myself what kind of guy I was, and then I went off and did this. Like, this guy has done terrible things.
Yeah, I do. I agree completely. I think there's also, and I actually agree with both of you because I think there's to be an academic about it. But I do think there's a version of this scene you could have done, or that they could have done,
Right.
where he leaves silently
Yeah.
in that kind of John Wick style, cool, silent sort of way that
Mm.
would have left a very different impression than the animal noises and the
Mm.
slightly strained holding the gun through the window where the gun is pointed at Grocer, but
There's
equally is trained on everyone else in the diner at the
mhm.
same time.
Mhm.
There's a really problematic, ugly character moment happening here that could well be intentional and kept in for the reasons you're saying, Hugh, but equally could have played out differently in a much
Absolutely.
slicker, stylish sort of
But
way.
here's the thing: if we're going to be, again, we've talked about whether or not what we're saying is or isn't in the minds of the people who made the film. For me, there's a symbolic moment in what you just said. There's people in the diner.
Mm.
He and Debbie felt they were outsiders in this town.
Hmm.
Martin does not really have any time or respect for the people who stayed. He left. He's only starting to get some of that back now that he's returned and started talking to the people who he knew. And
Mm.
I think he's behaving. I think Grocer reduces him to the teenager that kind of punky music. He would have had his headphones in at the diner. He would have
Mm.
snapped at the waitress when he was a teen back then because he didn't want to become like her. Or worse still, they know exactly who she is because she's related to somebody they go to school to, and it's just all of that nastiness is Grocer's like again, it's that father figure son figure thing. I think it comes
Mhm.
back to that, and again, I don't know if it. I mean, I'm not. I'm just throwing out these ideas. This is the way it makes me feel about it, is seeing it in that light.
it's the same traits we saw at the house showing, right? With
Yeah.
the rent a
Exactly.
cop. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
what I
Which was
feel.
equally
I can see that.
uncomfortable.
I think also this is really in my mind, very definitely an element introduced by Armitage. This
Yes,
feels like it's something out of Miami Blues. It
it
feels
does.
Mm.
like that character
Mm.
behavior that you see in
Yeah,
Miami Blues that I think
yeah.
for me also makes Miami Blues quite a hard film to watch.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, I mean, and in that sense, it's very much, and this brings us to the thing that we were talking about off mic. This brings us to the literature of crime fiction in America, because Miami Blues is obviously an adaptation of that Florida noir. So there's the comedy and the violence are meant to sit
Mm.
uneasily with each other. But with Grosse Pointe Blank, citing Detroit means you are referencing Elmore Leonard
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything Leonard did. And while Tarantino at this point has spoken about Leonard, and Leonard's had various things adapted from his work, but none of it's been hugely successful. Grosse Pointe Blank comes out just as Leonard's adaptations finally hit their stride with Out of Sight, Jackie Brown, and the things that make his books work, which is again the sharp contrast of local dialogue and sudden violence and threat, are coming into the film language properly now, rather than in the same, because he wrote westerns back in the day, and again you can see that some westerns understood how to adapt what he did on the page, like 310 to Yuma, and some didn't know how to do it, like Joe Kidd. And that's an arc that also involves the way the westerns go themselves. There's 2 decades between those two films, but then with Grosse Pointe Blank, I always feel like they knew that they were doing a kind of semi Elmore Leonard moments in this film, because he was famous, right? He's the most, at that point in time, he's arguably the most famous writer out of Detroit, or writing about Detroit in crime terms. Like by that point, I think I hadn't read his westerns at that point, but I had read like the first sort of 7 or 8 of his novels that were set in Detroit. So like Rum Punch and what's the one? Anyway, the point is they all get adapted one by one.
Yeah, but maybe Grosse Pointe being a kind of rich suburb outside of Detroit, then maybe that makes all of this make even more sense. To have that kind of Elmore Leonard Detroit creeping into this Grosse Pointe,
the safe
suburb, is part of the point being made.
I think so. I feel like that's what it's doing. I don't know. I mean, I'd love to talk to Armitage about it. God, I'd love to talk to him about this, because if he knew enough about this sort of American Pulp Fiction to have got involved in making Miami Blues, he must have known what he was doing. I feel like he had to have known.
And it might not even be coming from him. It could be coming from Cusack
or
Pink or one of the other writers. There's a lot going on here.
That's true. There's a lot of fingers in the pie, and as we said in other episodes, there's a lot of material cut down to make this version. And you know what? One last thing on that whole business of the retreat out the door and the use of the people, or the threat to the ordinary civilians. I really feel like a great part of what makes this movie a parody of action movies is its insistence on correcting things that American action movies famously used to get wrong. So, and Hong Kong films as well. So you always see them fire the exact right amount of shots and reload correctly, right? You always see them take professional stances when they use their weapons, right? This is there's no amateur hour in any of this. Even Grosser, with his big heavy revolvers at the start, he knows what he's doing with those revolvers. The reason he's got them is precisely so he can fire these 6-shooters and keep all of the shots, focused within a very small group, a very tight firing group, and then drop the guns and walk away, because then they'll be the casings are still in the bullet, so they're still in the chambers, but he doesn't have to worry about casings flying everywhere. It's just, that's it, it's done, I'm done, I'll walk away, leave that. And he will have presumably cleaned off everything before he fires it, so there's no prints. And it's just very much kind of like about the professionalism. This is a thing that we get too much of on the internet now. It's like, it's this horrible culture that started way back when with Mystery Science Theater 3000, and we now see it in honest trailers and all this other guff where people want to go on about why this isn't realistic or that doesn't make sense. And it's like, if we'd had the original cut from the script, everyone would be like, well, how do you get out of that? And we're like, I don't care, man. I'd be quite happy with it. But that's because I grew up in European cinema as well. It's like, whatever. But the thing is that I feel like sometimes there's things in this film that are there because they're addressing that American movie fan tendency. This film's really realistic with this. Yeah, but this film is not realistic. That bit of it is realistic, and the rest of it isn't. But I feel like that's kind of a thing, because Cusack goes so far out of his way to make sure that what he does is the equipment he uses, the stances he has, the way he handles himself. He goes so far out of his way to behave like someone who has professional combat training. I don't know. It's just a thought.
I know from what I've heard that Tom Jankiewicz was very conscious about introducing that realism and keeping it as real as possible. That's where we got the briefcase hiding technique and all of those things. So I think that also plays into it quite a bit in this film. And I love that you talk about the counting the number of rounds in the chamber, and then also count about cite Dan Aykroyd shooting God knows how many rounds out of those two revolvers.
No, but if you go back and watch it, he actually does shoot the exact number because he's got 2 guns, so it's 12 bullets.
He fires a lot more than 12 bullets.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't, but that's fine. That may just be in the cut in the edit. But yeah, fair dues. Yeah. Not going to argue over that because you're probably right. You've seen this way more than I have.
I mean, honestly, it's one of those things. It's like, for the entrance that character is making, who cares, right? Like, even for like trying to get that grounded realism, I think that's one break in reality that you can allow for, because it does give you the sense that this is a guy that revels in wet work, revels in his job, and will just, he goes big in the moment so that his exit is that much more surreptitious by comparison.
Great description.
But I do, and I will just, to bring everything back around to gender, I will just say one of the things I absolutely love about this movie is the way it cuts from that really awkward exit to a really beautiful moment where they're discussing, where he and Marcella start having a very different conversation. So I think that little moment of juxtaposition, if the others aren't great, is really nice.
That's true, and it's it continues that journey of Blank relating to people in a way that he hasn't been, and having those emotions that he needs to deal with, and he's not equipped to deal with them, and the desperation and the kind of almost like childlike need to rely on Marcella to fix things. Yeah.
Like a sister, almost, one would say.
Yeah. Almost, yeah.
Strange that. Perfect casting, that's what that is.
Absolutely right. Okay.
I mean, frankly, I would hire Joan Cusack to do anything ever at any time. She's fabulous.
You have joined with all our guests, you are now part of the Joan Cusack fan club.
I am for sure.
We all love her. We've discussed on other episodes just how, her career, her roles, her perfection in this film. Okay, shall we call it there?
For this minute? Yeah.
All right. This was minute 63 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers Dev Soligar and Hugh David.
Today's guest joining us this week has been Dr. Rayna Denison. Dr. Rayna Denison, where can we find you?
I'm at the University of Bristol and very easy to find via the University of Bristol website.
Awesome. And you can find us on all good podcast players, maybe even the one you're listening to us on, if you're listening to or if you're watching us, we are obviously on YouTube because that's the only place you can watch us. We're also on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Spotify as @Debi Radio, as well as our own website, debiradio.com. For all of those, it is Debi, spelt DEBI, and then radio.
And finally, if you want to come and chat with us, there's a listeners group on Facebook. It's Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. That's Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club, spelled DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time.